Rabbi Alan Liu was my predecessor at the synagogue I was previously at in Monroe, New York. And after he left that synagogue, he wrote a book called This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. It is a great title for any time, a book for any time, but particularly these days it rings so true. This is real and you are totally unprepared. It feels like that a lot. The book is a book about high holidays, but it rests on an interesting thesis that to understand the high holidays in the context of the Jewish year and to be really prepared for them when they come, you have to start with Tisha B'Av. Yep, Tisha B'Av. It's a holiday that we'll observe this coming Wednesday night and Thursday. It's a fast day where we mourn the destruction of both temples, the days the houses of God were ransacked. And for Rabbi Liu, the end of the holiday season is actually not Yom Kippur, but it's Sukkot, the holiday that the rabbi saw as the days of incredible joy. And he imagines people being in their sukkah and having such an amazing time. And at the end, taking apart the sukkah with great joy and anticipation for next year. Rabbi Liu argues that for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to mean something, you have to start from a place of existential sadness and end with the consummate joy of the sukkah. He writes, this dance that begins on Tisha B'Av and ends on Sukkot, that begins with the mournful collapse of a house and ends with the joyful collapse of a house. This intentional spasm that awakens us and carries us through death and back to life again stands for the journey the soul is always on. This intentional spasm that awakens us. Sometimes we need that. We need the thing that jolts us out of complacency and routine so much that we finally see what's not right about our relationship, what's not right in our heart, where we could do better. The call from a friend that says we have to talk. A life cycle event that reminds us of the passage of time. The moment we pay attention to that feeling in our gut, that feeling that we've tried really hard to ignore, that says the way we've been doing things is not sustainable. Tisha B'Av can awaken us. After the destruction of the second temple, the rabbis made lots of decisions about how Jewish life would carry on. They instituted regular prayer services that created schedules of regular Torah reading and Haftorah readings and other readings. And this week, they did something very elegant. They created an audible cue that's meant to awaken us. So in the Torah reading for this Shabbat, for tomorrow, Moshe cries out to God, Echa, how can I bear unaided the trouble of you and the burden and the bickering? Moshe cannot believe that he has to carry the burden of carrying the Israelite people. Echa, how can I do this? In the Haftarah for tomorrow morning, the prophet Isaiah bemoans how the people of Jerusalem were unfaithful to God, and he uses that same word. He says, Echa, how could it be that a city that was once filled with justice is now filled with murderers? And then on Tisha B'Av night, the book of Lamentations begins, Echa, alas, how could it be that Jerusalem, the city that was once filled with people, now sits lonely? Echa yashva vadad ha'ir rabati am hayta ka'almana. As a society, as a world, as individuals, Echa, all of this should make us ask in the same plaintive melody, how did we get here? With federal troops in American cities against the will of the mayors of those cities. With a Hasidic Jew verbally and physically attacked in Brooklyn. With the Crescent Avenue Baptist Church violated by intruders who ransacked the church, stealing computers and sound equipment. With our country in the grip of a pandemic that has caused a pandemic of loneliness and being scared. Echa, how could all this be? Rabbi Moshe Tarragon writes that the word Echa is a verbal gasp for air. What we see is shocking, and by exclaiming how, he writes, a person isn't expecting a response or information, but is trying to process something baffling and unimaginable. What's interesting is that with different vowels, the same four letters that spell the word Echa can be pronounced Ayeka, which means, where are you? That's what God asked Adam after he eats the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. Echa is the verbal gasp for air. Ayeka is the insistent call to place yourself in the narrative, to respond. It can seem that with so much going on, the only response is like Adam, to hide from God, to hide from ourselves, to hide from what we know. But if we do this, if we hide like Adam did, then we miss the opportunity and the message of the season. We need to be shocked every day by what we see and who we are, and we need to respond. When I spoke to Pastor Stanley about the burglary and vandalism at her church, she said how horrible it feels to know that people would do that, to attack a place of God. I told her that this week we observe a holiday called Tisha B'Av that mourns the ransacking of our temple in Jerusalem. And even though it was thousands of years ago, we still mourn. So I understand those feelings. But we don't just mourn. At the end of the fast, some people have the custom of sweeping their front steps, straightening their house, because they believe that at the end of Tisha B'Av, that's when the Messiah will arrive. In the course of the day, we move from mourning to action, from Eicha to Ayeka. And over the course of the month, through Elul and the fall holidays, over that whole time, 2 months, if we do it right, we find ourselves looking at our world and our lives and saying, Eicha, how could this be? And then hearing the other voice that says, Ayeka. Okay, where are you in all this? What are you going to do about what you see? In what ways are you going to express your political views? How will you show solidarity with Jews who are attacked in Brooklyn or anyplace else? How will you tell the people at Crescent that you feel their pain? What will you do to alleviate loneliness for other people at this time? And along with that, can you hear your own soul saying, Echa, how did I get here? How did I get to this place? But also, Ayeka, where am I? What can I do to fix that relationship, to move towards health, commit to living a life of values? This week, the world lost a man who knew how to say this isn't right, and he knew what it means to respond. Congressman John Lewis, a civil rights hero, wrote that freedom is not a noun, it is a verb. Freedom is not a state, he said, it's an act. It's not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can finally sit down and rest. Freedom is the continuous action we must all take, and each generation must do its part to create an even more fair, more just society. What he captures here is the need for constant vigilance and actions, but he could be talking about any of the things that are important to us, the things that we think are nouns, but are really verbs. Honesty, piety, connection, commitment, love. They're not states of being, they are acts that must be repeated again and again. As we move from Eicha to Ayeka, from the verbal gasp to coming out from our hiding places, from Tisha B'Av all the way to Sukkot, imagine us on the other end of those months. It's a journey. This year, much of it will not be the same as in the past, but I'm really glad that we're on it together. Shabbat Shalom.